And this is going to be the most important thing to watch between now and the midterm elections, because Democrats are going to say, if we want to make this a law of the land, enshrine it in the law, we have to do so by elected officials, because they already tried it in May and they couldn't get it through because they didn't have 60 senators.
Anne-Marie, stick with us. We're going to go back to the ground here and bring in Bloomberg's Joe Matthew, because as we look at this live feed of images here, we are, of course, looking at the pro-life supporters here. They are celebrating, it looks like, the decision from the Supreme Court. Of course, Joe Matthew also mentioned that there were pro-life or pro-abortion, I should say, pro-rights supporters there as well. But, Joe, come back on in here and walk us through what you're hearing from simply people on the ground. What kind of sentiment is there? You also mentioned that there were both sides of the story, but talk to us about what you're hearing from your sources on the ground.
Well, there's a lot of anger here. People are very willing, by the way, and looking in many cases to talk to reporters. They're trying to share their views on things, and a lot of these people who arrived since the ruling was announced had no intention or plan to be here. They just kind of dropped what they were doing and came down. Others were clearly up all night making signs and preparing a more organized front here. But it's, frankly, it's a fairly predictable crowd with regard to this issue. Very passionate on both sides. And in some cases, you can hear it, I think, a bit behind me. There's a bit of anger that's coming out here. This is a cathartic moment for both sides, for better and worse. I have seen a couple of pro-life demonstrators here, activists who came down, and they're broadcasting live on their phone, cheering. A couple of women who were doing this drew just a large group of camera crews from news networks to try to get a glimpse of this, because at least on the side of the court that I am on right now, this has been a largely pro-choice event. I'll tell you as well, Creedy, the Capitol Police have rolled in a couple of large buses full of officers, so they are preparing for what could be a long day. I know we'll have to hear from the president, and there's going to be a lot more rhetoric that comes before nightfall here, and police are starting to make preparations for whatever might happen.
Those preparations were exactly where I was going to go next, Joe. Of course, we know that for a very long time, you did have a lot of the more key buildings actually fenced off to some extent in D.C., but I'm curious to what extent those fences come back. Of course, a lot of people, a lot of D.C. residents were celebrating when that fencing had finally come down. I wonder if it comes back up now in light of some of the protests and some of the perhaps anxiousness that might be brewing, as you mentioned.